I'm Jason Carroll. I'll be your moderator today. And together with my colleague, Allegra Hill, where she's hiding, we constitute the Think Local Liberty team here at the Foundation, tackling problems at the local level. Joining us today is a very esteemed group. We have, starting off, Senator Don Huffines, who represents District 16, which is the northern half of Dallas County. And by the way, he's also a fellow Longhorn. We have also with us Austin City Council member Ellen Troxclair, who represents District 8 here in Austin and is also a Longhorn. Josiah Neeley, who is the Texas director of the R Street Institute and our third Longhorn on the panel. And then finally we have Joe Deshotel, who has been gracious to join us from the Travis County Democratic Party and is the Director of the Communications. Please help me welcome this very esteemed panel. So before we get into this rather interesting issue, which I think has all sorts of wrinkles, what I want to do is call your attention to something on the big screen for a minute. And that is, this isn't really just a battle between nameless, faceless corporations and governments. What we have are real people facing real problems using these types of services to find solutions. And I want to call your attention for a second to Mia. And this is a young lady that I met up in Detroit, Michigan, and had the pleasure of interviewing. Why don't we go ahead and roll the tape on Mia?
I'm a school bus driver. The state of Michigan does not pay unemployment. I'm a school bus driver. The state of Michigan does not pay unemployment for school bus drivers. So I needed to find something to supplement my income for at least the 10 weeks that I'm off until school starts back up. So I started with this company and I haven't had any complaints. It pays me. It depends on me. I can set my own hours. I can do things that it depends on me. I can set my own hours. I can do the things that I need to do within a day. If I'm out and I need to run errands, I can either leave my app on and then I can do lifts while I do errands, or I can shut it down. I can take vacation when I want. I don't have to ask.
Now that's just a short clip from a video that you can find on Texas Policy's YouTube page. But what I wanted to do is illustrate that there are some very real people who are benefiting from these services. And so as we discuss, the implications of municipal regulations and all of the minutia behind it, I want the audience to keep in mind the impact that this has on your everyday person. And so why don't we go ahead and start off, with our round of questions. Councilmember Troxclair, why don't we start with you? Rumor has it that there's an election coming up.
Yes.
And I'm curious. I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts on it. Do you think that if the election goes poorly for Uber and Lyft, is there a chance that Austinites could lose this particular service?
Oh, I think absolutely. If the city continues on the path that with the resolution that they passed in December to institute these really extensive and overburdensome requirements on these companies, I have no doubt that both Uber and Lyft will not operate in Austin anymore. Of course, if it's not successful and the city council does decide to come back and renegotiate, like the city council did in San Antonio after both companies left, then hopefully there would be a future for ride sharing in Austin. But I mean, I hope that Prop 1 will pass and that we will continue with reasonable regulations that we've had in Austin for the past 2 years and give people not only the option to take a bus or a taxi, but also have the opportunity to have a wide range of ride sharing companies operating in Austin.
Joe, I want to give you a chance too. Is there a chance that if things go poorly for Uber and Lyft, that Austinites lose this particular service within their area? Is that something you see as a risk?
I think they have to leave at this point. I think what they've said and the way they've acted so far and what they've done in other cities, they're going to have to leave. I don't think the question is whether they leave. I think the question is how long do they stay away? Because I think immediately, I happen to agree with the mayor that the only way to get the responsible regulations that would foster competition across the board in the ride-for-hire industry is to vote against Prop 1 and allow Uber and Lyft to come back to the table with City Council and finish the work that they started.
So it sounds like there may be some agreement here that there's a chance they could leave. And Josiah, I know our Street Institute has been looking at this issue and expressing concern that if they do leave, as it appears they might, there's a chance that the City of Austin could lose out on the Smart City Challenge and potentially risk a $50 million grant. Is that something you see as well?
Well, that's, in fact, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce just the other day submitted a letter to that effect. So, $50 million, that's not nothing. But, of course, losing the value of the service itself is, also a very significant thing. You're talking about not only a source of income for people who might be driving, but you're talking about what can be a real safety improvement from having this alternative for the citizens of Austin and people who might live outside the city but work in the city or travel in the city.
Mm-hmm. As a big fan of KLBJ, I listen to Drive Time Radio on the way in every morning, and it seems like one of the frustrations that's frequently expressed by the listeners is that they don't know how to vote on this particular proposition. And just as a disclaimer, TPPF does not take a position on Proposition 1 one way or the other, but I want to call attention to the ballot language itself because I think there may be some problems here. And let me read it to you. It says, shall the city code be amended to repeal city ordinance number 202-151217-075 relating to transportation network companies, semicolon, and replace with an ordinance that would repeal and prohibit required fingerprinting, repeal the requirement to identify the vehicle with a distinctive emblem, repeal the prohibition against loading and unloading passengers in a travel lane, and require other regulations for a transportation network company. Now, I feel like you have to be a lawyer to really understand what's going on here. Was there no better way that the city could have put this forward? Was there any disagreement among council members?
Oh, absolutely. Both Councilmember Zimmerman and I voted against that, or voted actually against, we ended up having to vote against calling the election because the ballot language was so misleading and there was no way for us to separate the two out. This was not the ballot language that was included in the citizens petition that led to the election in the first place. This was not the ballot language that the council spent the, first couple of weeks talking about it. And ultimately it was something completely different that is incredibly confusing. And I think that when you read that, you assume it says repeal the fingerprinting requirement. If you get in an Uber or a Lyft right now, they are not fingerprinted. There is not a requirement today that your driver is fingerprinted. So to say, yes, there is an ordinance now that will go into effect in the future that will require fingerprinting, but it's really disingenuous to talk about how these regulations are basically already in place and how Uber and Lyft are trying to write their own rules and get out of these city regulations when actually it was the city council 2 years ago in 2014 that put the regulations in place that the election is supporting. So if you vote for Prop 1, you are supporting the regulations again passed in 2014 under Mayor Lee Leffingwell, passed 6-1. And those were passed after an extensive stakeholder group that included the taxi industry and the ride-sharing industry, as well as our city staff.
Please, Joe, jump on in.
Okay, so I just want to say a couple of things because I actually I was Mayor Leffingwell's political director in 2014, and at the end of that year, I worked with Chris Riley to craft that temporary ordinance that was passed, which she referenced that the companies still operate under now, but there are two important parts of that that are different. One is it told the new city council that it will be your job to look at that ordinance and compare it to other cities in the country, peer cities, how they're doing this or not, and left it up to the city council to make changes. But I think even more importantly, number 14 instructed the city manager to create a system that was equitable among other transportation companies. And Prop 1 will not do that. Not only will Prop 1 not do that, it will prevent us from making any changes for 2 years And when we do, it will need a supermajority to change. And I think that relates very strongly to the Smart Cities Challenge, because that is about being innovative. And it's very difficult to be innovative if you can't even be flexible with the regulations that you have.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, please.
Well, because this idea of leveling the playing field or having the same regulations that apply to businesses in a similar industry, I mean, that was an idea that was really important for me to examine, because of course, as a free market conservative, I do believe that having a level playing field is important to encourage competition. The problem is that in this case, you have two options, right? I guess the first option, if you're going to truly level the playing field, is just to create a make TNCs apply for a taxi franchise and just make them taxi companies. And the other option is to deregulate the taxi companies and allow them to compete on the same level as TNCs. What the city council did in December, not only does it not make TNCs operate like taxis, but the fingerprint, that's just one tiny thing of a huge list of regulations that taxi cabs are required to operate under. I mean, they have their number of permits set by city council, they have their rates set by city council, all of these other things. Fingerprinting is one tiny piece of the way that the city of Austin regulate, and cities across the country regulate cabs. So voting against Prop 1 in no way levels the playing field. And I think then from a broader policy discussion, that I think the state is going to have to deal with is it possible to regulate them in the same way if you are going to maintain some semblance of the existing taxi entities and allow TNCs to operate? Because if you think about, I think the most recent example is wireless telecommunications. Back in the day when we only had landlines and wireless was coming into play, there was an argument from a lot of people that they had to be regulated in the same way, that when you pick up a landline and you pick up your cell phone, they both provide the same service, and that you can't allow these new wireless companies to come in if you don't regulate them in the same way as the landline. Well, of course, it's impossible. I mean, there's different rights of way. It's completely different technology. It is not possible to regulate those two things in the same way. So it's a similar conundrum that I think you've seen in a million different industries as history has progressed, and candles have been replaced by electricity, and Blockbuster has been replaced by Netflix. And I mean, there's a lot of different examples that we can point to that I think are significant challenges, and certainly voting against Prop 1 does not level the playing field in any way.
Right, I don't think it levels the playing field. I just think it brings everybody back to the table so that we can continue the conversation about what a level playing field might actually look like.
I think it's going to be very embarrassing for the city of Austin if we don't have Uber or Lyft here or any of the ride-sharing companies. I mean, there's a city that touts itself as innovative and a high-tech hub of the state of Texas, and it's going to be kind of ironic if they're going to regulate out the most innovative, creative, new innovative technology we've had around in a long time. But speaking of that, I can tell you that it's certainly a role of the state government to step in and have preemptive legislation to regulate local municipalities. I mean, this is a perfect example of where the state does have a role, and you're asking what would be the state, how do we regulate it? Well, I like to say that I've already thought about that, and I've got my my legislation working, and we've got all the regulations already filled out in the bill and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And what are they?
No, I can do it.
Yeah, what are they? Well, there won't be any. And so we're going to level the playing field by making sure there are no regulations for any of the ride-sharing companies or for the cab companies. We're here to level it out and let everybody compete. Like I say, they don't need to be hiring lobbyists. They need to be hiring IT folks. And so that's the role of the state. We're going to, personal liberty is just as important as economic liberty. And that's the role of the state's going to protect our economic liberty for everyone in the state of Texas.
So building on that thought, about 2 or 3 years ago, Governor Abbott came out and talked about the Californization of Texas, where you have a patchwork quilt of rules, regulations, and other onerous items, really being driven at the local level and taking away from the Texas model. Is this something that you see along those lines as well, and something that the legislature needs to be more active in?
Absolutely. It is. We did a pretty good job. Well, one bill we worked on last session that got all the way through was the hydraulic fracking bill. Where municipalities are regulating on that. So I think this is a lot more important than that. And so I'm confident, I'm cautiously confident that the legislature is going to act on this issue and have preemptive legislation going forward on not only on regulating ride-sharing companies, but also on other issues. There's a lot of liberty issues that are out there that we're seeing what Governor Abbott talked about. And we'll end up like Illinois, where Chicago's got anti-gun laws, Chicago's got minimum wage laws. And so I think there's a role for the state government to step in and make sure we have good economic liberty and freedom here.
Joe, what about that? Should the state legislature be aiming to preempt this type of regulation?
The Californiization? Well, I mean, Uber and Lyft are both from California, so, I mean, that's, you know, but you look at what they're doing there, and they're still fighting the city of San Francisco. So if it's about whether you're innovative or not, I guess we got to question whether San Francisco is a tech hub or not, or innovative, Bay Area is innovative or not, or if Portland, Oregon is innovative or not, or if Seattle, Washington is innovative or not, or if the country of Germany is innovative or not, who's completely banned their service because of the way that they come in. And I mean, it's one thing to be disruptive, but you know, all innovation is disruptive, but not all disruption is innovative. And I think that's what we're seeing with Uber and Lyft in a lot of cases. Because I think cities would love to work with them and need them, and consumers want them. But you know, why trade one monopoly for another? You know, so that's the way I see it. I think that's the path that we're on, and everybody loves it now because it's cheap. But they're subsidizing both ends of the ride. They're subsidizing the rider by giving away free rides, and they're subsidizing the driver by giving them certain guarantees to keep the price point low. And now, as soon as you know they get the regulatory system the way they want, they have to start either paying drivers less, which causes another set of disruption, or they have to raise prices, and then customers are upset. So I think there's a lot that, you know, it sounds good, let the free market kind of work it out or whatever, but there's clearly lots of disruption. We saw a $100 million lawsuit that included 385,000 drivers in just 2 states. So, I mean, I think there's a real concern about a bubble that could be forming with Uber and Lyft. In the same way everybody loved Napster when Napster came out. Who still uses Napster? I mean, it's Spotify.
Well, Napster, wasn't there a lawsuit filed against them by the government?
Well, again, there you go. But the point is they're not here, are they? Right. But Spotify is, and iTunes is here, and there are other services. So will Uber and Lyft, are they end all be all? No, I don't think so. I think other companies will gladly fill the gap, and I think they're working on that and trying that. So whether it's Get Me, who's here right now and says they're going to stay, or whether it's Juno, who's starting up in New York right now, or Chariot for women, which is women specifically and children. You know, I think I believe Austin's an innovative place, and we have a great market for, you know, so we have the demand. I think there will be the supply.
So speaking of monopolies and disruptions, Councilmember, I'm interested to hear a bit of an insider perspective, because I have this bubbling curiosity about the role that the taxi cab companies play behind the scenes and whether or not they are influential in the process. Did you see any of that during your discussions and your deliberations on council?
Well, I think historically, taxi companies around the country have been very influential in local governments. I'm sure, and I don't think Austin is any different. Of course, I've only been in office a year and a half, and yes, I've met with Yellow Cab and some of the other companies a couple times, and they were the ones who first mentioned to me this idea of fingerprinting. So that's when we talk about corporations and corporate money being involved in this. Don't make any mistake that the initial idea came from one of the biggest corporations, which is the cab companies. But, you know, I don't know, you know, there's been a lot of talk about how maybe money has played individual contributions to council members, whether that plays any role. And I don't necessarily think, I don't think that my fellow council members were in any way unduly influenced by that. But I do think that it's difficult for governments in general to adapt quickly and effectively to new technologies, especially when they may or may not have experienced it themselves and they don't maybe understand the difference.
Josiah, there, in your experience with our street, have you guys encountered these kind of entrenched special interests that are having undue influence over the process?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at other cities across the country, one of the interesting things that you see is that the more tightly regulated cities' taxi cab industry is, the more pushback you get against ride sharing, and the more attempts there are to put restrictive regulations on ride sharing. And part of the reason for that is a tightly regulated market precludes competition. It means that the people that are incumbents that are in there, they make a lot of money from not having to face competition, and so that is something that they would like to preserve. In cities where the taxi market is relatively more open, there's less resistance to introducing ride sharing. I did want to go back to one thing, because one thing that I agreed to, a good point that you made up is, it's important. We talk a lot about Uber and Lyft, and those of course are not the only two ride sharing companies that are out there. And it's important that new companies be able to enter into the market. My understanding, I don't know if you can confirm this or not, council member, is that there were, even prior to this new regulation, there were other companies that approached the city and said, hey, we'd like to join in. And they were told, no, you can't do that. You'd have to go back to the council. And then right before the new regulation was put in place, the one company, Get Me, I believe, was told, okay, you can go forward. But there are still other companies that either under the old regulations or the new regulations would like to enter the market, and the city, at least at one point, was telling them, no, you can't do that.
Well, and there was a company, I think it was called Sidecar, operating
Right.
in Austin even before Uber and Lyft were here.
Right.
But ultimately they weren't able to be successful, whether it was due to the regulatory environment or whatever the cause was. I don't think I think that people who talk about, oh, well, someone can just come in and take their place, Uber and Lyft aren't complaining about fingerprinting just because they feel like it, just because they don't want to. I mean, there's a reason that they feel so strongly about this issue, and those reasons are going to also apply to Get Me and to any new companies who's here. I was meeting with the Get Me operator the other day, and I was asking him some questions because he was being so vocal about supporting the fingerprinting and really wanting us to move forward with some of these regulations. And because fingerprinting was so important to him, because he really felt like that's how riders were kept safe. And so I finally said, well, how is the fingerprinting process working for you? I mean, how long is it taking your drivers to get fingerprinted? And he said, we're not fingerprinting right now. We're not, but just like if the city makes us do it, I think that we'll do it. And so, they don't have experience at all in operating under the kind of restrictions that they're saying that they support.
Joe, chance to respond?
Yes, I really like, again, what the council passed back in January, the idea of an innovation ordinance, which I think was dubbed Thumbs Up or program, and that would allow potential drivers to go one place and put their thumbprints in, do their background checks, one-stop shop. Right now, it's incredibly difficult because I've tried to do it myself to see, because to be part of this conversation, I thought it was important. Went through the Uber sign-up process as a driver, went through the taxi cab process, and it's very difficult, and it should be easier. And I think that is the one good thing for sure that Uber has done in terms of regulatory system is brought this conversation up so that we can have it and we can do something innovative. And I think allowing them to go to multiple places in the city, like with a partner, like HEB or something like that, that's in different parts of the city where drivers can go take care of everything in one place and then start driving soon after, I think is very important and something that our city is working towards. And again, I don't think we can actually even get to that unless we vote against Prop 1, because that was something that the council passed back in January as a voluntary program for fingerprinting. Mm-hmm. And so, but just really quickly, why I think it's so important, whether you believe fingerprinting is important or not, I absolutely believe that seeing another human being face to face before you take strangers in your car is important. And whether you're giving that person your fingerprints or not, I don't care. Lyft, you have to actually visit with someone who works for Lyft before you take a stranger in the car, even if they don't take your fingerprints. Uber, that's not the case. I think that's unfortunate. I think in the case of the Kalamazoo shooter, maybe fingerprints wouldn't have stopped him from going around and shooting anybody, or maybe he didn't have anything in his background. But the fact is, when he took passengers, those passengers jumped out of the car and immediately called Uber and authorities and said, hey, this guy, something's wrong with this guy. And then the guy, it turned out he was going around shooting people while he was driving around. And then somewhere, I think in Ohio, there was a gun store owner who refused to sell a gun to a guy because something didn't seem right about this guy. And it turned out the guy was planning to kill people. And so we can't just rely on everybody to always stop mad people out there. But I do think it's really important that we have some vetting by another human being before a driver takes strangers in their car.
Just don't get in the car. I mean, if you feel like it's not safe to ride with that driver, just don't get in the car. I don't see what the big issue is here. You feel like the local government feels like that they need to fingerprint the driver. The driver's a lot more at risk to being the victim of a crime than the passengers are. Why don't you fingerprint all the passengers getting in the vehicle? So for the government to get involved in this, I just find humorous myself to think that you're going to feel like you're going to make everybody safe getting in that car by fingerprinting some guy driving a car. I mean, if you take it to that level, why not just get rid? What we're talking about here really is crony capitalism. We're talking about cab companies that want to keep out their competition, and they're going to figure out a way to do that because this is disruptive technology and is going to put them out of business. Granted, they've got regulations that they're having to deal with too, but why don't we just eliminate the regulations for everybody and let the customer choose? If you don't want to get in the car, don't get in the car.
Can I just build off that
Please,
a little bit? Because you're absolutely right. The drivers of cabs, it's a very hazardous business to be in, and one of the reasons is because they deal with a lot of cash. People are getting cash, and they are picking up people off the street. They're at a high risk for robbery or mugging, something like that. And one of the safety advantages I think that comes through these ride-sharing platforms is it's a cash-free transaction. So there's that incentive eliminated.
So that's the case with Lyft because they allow you to tip through the app. Uber, again, does not. And so in this $100 million lawsuit, they now have to allow their drivers to take tips. But because they won't do it through the app and they will refuse to add that option into the app, they have to take cash. So here we are again. And taxi cab drivers, it is one of the most dangerous jobs in America. And that is one reason it's so important not to just, without training and without just letting anybody do the job without any kind of vetting or anything for their own safety. And part of the Thumbs Up program, Senator, actually, interesting you brought that up, is that they said, yeah, sure, if you want passengers to do the thumbs up too, or you want people on Grindr or Tinder, you want to know that they've already had their fingerprint done, then they can be a part of that program because it wasn't a government-run program. It was a third party, a different company set up to do the vetting, the same way Uber and Lyft does their background checks through a third party.
I was being facetious.
I know you were. But that's.
Yeah, I was. I mean,
you were being facetious.
If you don't want to drive the cab, if you think driving a cab is dangerous, don't drive the cab. I think. Look, and you think we got sexual assault? You're trying to worry about sexual assaults and things like that. Probably 40% of the Uber drivers I get are ladies. Right? We want women to drive for ride-sharing companies. So we're all worried about the driver's going to rape a passenger or something like that. Well, these are women driving these cars. So I just think this is it's a false pretense that you're going to make people safer, and I think that causes more unsafe behavior. When you have a false premise, it's a false idea that you're going to make somebody safer, so they're going to act more reckless. Instead of having two people get in the car with you, no, I think this guy's been vetted before by the government, so I'm only getting that car by myself. Instead of having somebody ride with you.
Right. I mean, people say this. I'm sorry.
It causes more reckless behavior.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it causes you to let your guard down. If you this discussion that it's frustrating to get caught up in this fingerprinting discussion, because there really is no data that is proving to us that if you get in a car with a driver that has been fingerprinted, that you're any safer than a driver who had gone through a different kind of background check. And so for all this talk about, the young vulnerable women who are downtown by themselves at night, if they see a thumbs up on that app and they think that, okay, I'm going to be safe because I'm getting in the car with this person who's been fingerprinted, they let their guard down and they're not as alert. And I think the overlying thing is you take a risk. Government cannot prevent bad things from happening. Otherwise, we would not have crime in this world. Although there's certainly an interest in the government in taking reasonable public safety precautions, you take a risk if you get in a car with a stranger. You take a risk if you get in a car by yourself and get hit by someone else. You take a risk, if you leave your house in the morning. So at what point is that appropriate line in protecting public safety and allowing people to make choices? And from the City of Boston perspective, one of the things that I've found most ironic is that Cap Metro bus drivers, the largest public transportation provider in the city, does not fingerprint their drivers. So, if this is really a public safety necessity, I just think it's really interesting that Cap Metro, who of course doesn't necessarily compete with cabs, has not been brought into the conversation.
Well, I want to stay on this issue of public safety real quick because there's been a little bit of a firestorm around Austin Police Chief Art Acevedo's recent comments to the City Council, where he said that effectively ride-sharing services provide a valuable alternative to driving people who've had too much to drink. And I want to ask the panel, is there any data or research out there to substantiate that ride-sharing is helping to diminish drunk driving?
Yes. DWI-related crashes have gone down over 20% since Uber and Lyft have come to town. So that's and although there was an article published recently that said that was not necessarily a correlation could be established there statistically, it doesn't take a genius to realize that having a lot more options when you're trying to get home at night and seeing that drunk driving crashes have reduced 20%, that's a huge number, 20%. And I think that's one reason that the UT student government just nearly unanimously supported Prop 1, because it's not a Republican Democrat thing, it's not a political thing, it's a common sense thing. They know that their friends and themselves are safer when they have ride-sharing services because they're not as likely to get in a car and drive drunk or to be hit by a drunk driver.
Yeah, and there's also been research. There's a couple of professors at a Temple that looked at 540 cities they introduced Uber and different Uber services at different times, and so they compared what effect did this have on drunk driving fatalities and homicides, and they found that there was a statistically significant decrease in drunk driving fatalities when the UberX service came into an area.
Joe, what about that? What about the drunk driving question?
I think it makes sense that the more options you have, the better, and I think that's exactly what we need to be doing, and we need to be building on our public transit system a lot better in the city as well. But again, this is obviously correlative data. This isn't causal. We don't know how much it had. We don't know if it was 5% of that 20% or half of that 20% or what. We don't know how much mandatory blood taking from APD and mandatory stops had to do with that more than anything. What we also know that traffic fatalities that deal with alcohol-related incidents have gone up in that same amount of time, from 68 instances to over 100 instances. So we don't blame that on Uber. We don't blame that on surge pricing because people were too drunk. Drunk people looked at it's surging 4 times. Maybe I'll just drive home anyway. So obviously I think more options is a good thing. And again, nobody's asking Uber to leave. So yeah, I think we should do everything we can to prevent drunk driving, including asking Uber not to leave.
Isn't it a bit of a public safety risk, though, if a city is putting on these companies such onerous restrictions that they ultimately decide to leave altogether? Then you remove that option entirely for people who've had too much to drink.
Well, I think that's the company's position because that's the leverage that they feel they have over the city. And I think it's pretty disgusting that they would say, well, we're going to stop taking drunk drivers home if you regulate us a way we don't like. And I think, again, there are other companies that have clearly stated that they have no issue with some of these requirements. But even even I don't think that we should be driving them out or making it too onerous for them to operate. And so that's why, again, I keep going back to what the mayor said about making this voluntary system that was put in place. And I think that that's where we should be picking up after May 7th.
Well, I think you are driving the ride-sharing companies out of town. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And that's why they said they're going to leave. I mean, it's because of your regulations. So it's hard for Austin to sit here and say, okay, we want them to be here, but by the way, you got to jump, here's all the regulations you got to operate under because the cab companies want you to, because they're having to. And, you know, so you are driving them out of town.
And, unfortunately for Austin, it's not, the government doesn't have the ability to make that business decision for them. They're perfectly within their rights to leave the city. And the only reason that they have that leverage in the first place is because the people think the service is so valuable. I mean, can you imagine, there's practically no other business that I can think of that if they threatened to leave Austin, that there would be such a public outcry and public uproar to the point that we have 65,000 people signing a petition asking the Austin City Council to come to our senses and to allow these people, allow for reasonable regulations. And Chief Acevedo, going back to the drunk driving issue, Chief Acevedo said in front of our in our public hearing that the worst thing the city could do was to lose 10,000 options for its citizens, meaning the 10,000 plus drivers that ride sharing has because of this significant impact on public safety.
Look, we don't even know where this technology is going to go. This is its infancy. And to put regulations on an industry like this, even the people Lyft and Uber don't know where this is going, where this is all headed. What's it going to be like 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now? And we're sitting here trying to put regulations on a whole innovative, disruptive technology. And we're liable to stifle it for what it could be and what it can be going forward in the future. Maybe the free market will determine where this is all going, not the government, right? People are going to determine where it's going to go. I trust people. Unlike some, I guess, other people that like to regulate, so I trust everybody in here to make the right decision, what's best for them in their life and how to operate themselves and whether or not to get in that vehicle or not and how to vet that driver or that company. And that's what we want in society. That's where government, the proper role of government is to step out of the way and let the free market run with this. Maybe we got a company that wants to start that just picks up drunks. I mean, and now you're going to make sure that doesn't happen? I mean, really, maybe that's their specialty, okay? And I know Uber charges more on the surge night, but, you know, maybe it's $20 more if you're drunk. And, you know, you're going to get that car. And
there's a new service that says they're only going to pick up women and only have female drivers.
There you go.
Well, there's also one that's called Sober Monkeys that only picks up drunk people.
Is that right? What's already there out there? See, the market's going to run.
Yeah, they're here.
And to build on that point, you keep bringing up Get Me and that they're willing to agree to these regulations. The thing is, there's nothing stopping them right now. There's nothing stopping them from creating a competitive advantage. If fingerprinting is truly something that they feel like makes people safer and they feel like there's a consumer demand for, great, go fingerprint all your drivers and use it to your advantage and market that you're the only ride-sharing company in town that has fingerprinting drivers. There's nothing stopping them from doing that.
So I do think we know where this is going. It's going towards driverless cars. So this whole fingerprinting thing will be moot anyway in probably, you know, a decade or two maybe. So I think that's one thing. And that's what's kind of bothered me about the whole idea of the job creation thing, because clearly they're going to disemploy those 10,000 people as soon as they possibly can. But, you know, so we know where that technology is going. And I think that the city should make it easier for people to go through the background check system and get on board, because these drivers, remember, they're independent contractors. And so why shouldn't, as an independent contractor, it be your decision who you drive for? Let the companies compete for you as a driver and give you the best option, and let them go to whatever company, whether it's a pedicab or a legacy cab or a chauffeur or a horse and carriage or whatever, or an Uber or Lyft. You should be, you know, the city, you go through the ringer one time, and then you can drive for whoever you want in a competitive environment.
I have background checks.
What?
Why have background checks? Why not let the company decide if they want to do background checks?
I mean, sure, I guess, why not? I mean,
Why would the city get involved in having mandatory background checks?
Why would?
Requiring drivers to have background checks, yeah.
Well, because I think obviously people care about that issue, and if they didn't, then we wouldn't see Uber and Lyft spending millions of dollars to tell us how great their background checks are.
Why not wouldn't you think the consumer can have that option? Let the consumer decide that. If the company wants to promote that we're the safest ride-sharing company in the world and we do background checks, everybody in here has got a concealed handgun license, they're all off-duty policemen driving these cars. I mean, let the free market determine that. And maybe they charge extra for that or they charge less for that. But it's up to them. It's not up to the government to dictate who's our safety and our security in private industry.
I mean, I kind of disagree. I bet most people in here would like to go into a restaurant they know has been through a health inspection. I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe you don't care. Maybe it should be the free market. Maybe this taco stand doesn't do health inspections, and then this one does.
It's a little different to eat food than it is to get in a rideshare.
Well, I think safety is the issue, and that's what we're talking about. Then that's why it matters. And so, I think that's really important that we have some level. I mean, it's the government who people are going to go to if something goes wrong. They're going to go to the government and say, "How did you let this happen?"
That's a good point. I suspect they'll go to the company first. The company's much more at risk, much more at stake in making sure their passengers are safe. They're the ones that are going to get sued. They're the ones that are going to go get out of business. They're the ones that put the equity and the capital up. They're the ones that have the debt out there trying to create something that's innovative. And so they're much more at risk than the government. I mean, the government, if somebody gets hurt or something goes wrong inside that car, the company's the one that's most worried about that.
Right.
Isn't the city currently making it harder for private companies to do background checks on employees?
Yeah, isn't that an interesting
Check the box.
conundrum?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Yeah.
They're actually not. It doesn't change the fact that somebody gets a background check. It changes when in the process they get the background check. So no, that's not accurate to say that they're making it harder to do background checks on people. So I'll just to make that clear about the ban the box issue, which is important.
Well, it's just another example. For criminal justice reform, do we want do we want check the box so people who have an issue in their background, who served their time to society and paid their debts to society, we want them so they can't be an Uber driver? No. I mean, what were you looking for in a background check? I mean, I don't even know where these fingerprints are going. I mean, what are you going to come up with? If somebody's got a federal warrant outstanding or something? So,
if someone was convicted of, say, child molestation, you don't think that should ban them from driving for Uber?
Have they paid their debt to society?
I don't know if you can. I don't know if a lot of people
are they out?
Are
Are they on prison? Are they broke out of prison? Yeah, they should probably. But they probably should be back arrested in jail. But once they've paid their debt to society, I'm not for punishing. Continuing punishing.
I just want to say something about the FBI background database that is being used in general, which is that database is primarily, if you think about when do you get fingerprinted in the process, it's not when you're convicted, it's when you're arrested. And about half of the records in that database do not include the ultimate results of what that arrest was, whether there was a conviction or an acquittal, maybe the case wasn't pursued.
Right.
In 30% of all arrests, there isn't a conviction. So you do have, I think, I think people can overestimate how reliable using that database is. I mean, it will be your fingerprint that comes back, but it won't necessarily say what happened in that case. And so you can get a lot of people who they were arrested, but there wasn't evidence, to convict them of any crime, and it's coming back that they, as if they were convicted of a serious crime.
And this issue about, I guess, the government making you safer, I am not convinced that our transportation department is in any way prepared to handle the massive and extensive amount of work that the city council has put on them with the mandatory fingerprinting and all of the other mandates that are associated with it. There was just an audit released from our city auditor that said that the transportation department right now is not communicating properly, that the resources aren't being spent effectively. There's the lack of coordination. So it highlighted all of these issues. And meanwhile, we have this fingerprinting requirement that's supposed to go into effect on May 1st. I mean, just a couple days from now. They were the Lyft and Uber and any other rideshare company operating in Austin is supposed to have 25% of their drivers fingerprinted. Yet there has not been a single word from the transportation department about what preparations they're making to do that, what kind of staff they're allocating to it, do they have any process in place, how are they going to check to make sure that this is enforced, are they prepared to pull the licenses, and most importantly, how much it's going to cost. They have not given us any indication of how much taking over this entire background check and fingerprinting program is going to cost the city, which means how much it's going to cost the taxpayers. And I think that there are a lot of people in Austin who, regardless of whether or not they use ride sharing, they're concerned that the city is making a decision to basically potentially increase their property tax bill to cover a program that has yet to have a price tag.
Looking ahead, irrespective of what happens in Austin, it seems like ride-sharing companies are taking a much more aggressive posture across the state. And it seems like that could trickle into the next legislative session. And I'd be curious to know, Josiah, beginning with you, what are the legislative reforms that conservatives ought to be looking to put in place to eliminate some of these problems we see at the local level?
Yeah, and you're right that this is an issue that is kind of popping up in a lot of different Texas cities. In Corpus Christi, it was in Houston and San Antonio, previously
Midland, Galveston,
So there's a lot,
El Paso.
Right, so it's a lot of different places. And during the last legislative session, there was a bill that would have set up a state legislative framework that made it pretty far. It ended up there not being enough time. So I imagine that something like that will come back again.
Joe, please.
So on that note, yeah, there was that bill. I don't think it made it quite to the House Calendar Committee, but Senate Transportation Chair Nichols actually said that he was going to bring it back. He thinks if it had fingerprinting, it would actually make it to the floor for a vote. So he thinks they would have more support with fingerprint. So I think it would be ironic if they lose this battle here at the local level, or even win the battle at the local level, and then go to the state and then end up getting a fingerprint requirement statewide. So, that could happen.
So is that part of the package that TDCP will support, or do you guys have other reforms that you're also looking to advance?
We tend to concentrate on what's happening within our county and locally. But I read on the quorum report that Senator Nichols said that he will introduce a bill as the Senate Transportation Chair to fingerprint all TNC drivers.
Actually, that is not what he said. He said that if a bill with fingerprinting, if a bill had fingerprinting in it, he thinks it would pass. But he did not say that he would introduce that bill, and he also didn't say that he thought a bill without fingerprinting wouldn't pass. I mean,
I read that this morning. I mean, I'd be happy to share it with you, but I remember specifically seeing that he said that he wanted to sponsor a bill. But whatever. The idea is that it's a popular concept, he believes, amongst Republicans, apparently, because it can't pass without their help. So if he thinks that'd be more popular with fingerprinting, I'm just pointing out the irony that if they lose at the local municipal level, that they might end up getting fingerprinting requirements at the state level.
Well, I'm on the Transportation Committee with Senator Nichols, and he's been there a long time, and he does a great job in running the Transportation Committee for the Senate, and he's a great senator. But I can tell you that I would be very, very surprised if that bill not only cleared transportation but got to the floor. Matter of fact, I like to think it's going to be the opposite effect, that I like to think our best days are ahead of us in the state of Texas. It is a new day in Austin. It's certainly a new day in the Senate. We've got 20 Republicans down there. Last session we had 8 new freshmen, and we're going to have 2 more, and I'm confident that we all believe in liberty. We all believe in personal responsibility, and that would be going in the exact opposite direction of what we all campaign for, what the Lieutenant Governor stands for. And I just know that our best days are ahead of us. Let me tell you guys, liberty is coming, and we're going to make it. So we're going to preempt these local regulations, and we're going to preempt it so we can have freedom in the state of Texas.
Building on something that Councilmember Troxclair said, Senator Huffines, talking about leveling the playing field. Do you think there's an appetite in the committee to also examine whether or not taxi cab companies are being over-regulated and whether some relaxation there might be merited.
Of course, that's the whole. Look, we're not here to. I'm not here to take sides on this in this battle between cab companies or not, or ride-sharing companies. I'm here to level the playing field and let the market decide. And so what we want to do is the preemptive legislation that's going to be the most beneficial for everyone. It will eliminate the regulations for everyone. And keep the cities from regulating one company over another because they hired the best lobby, or took you out to dinner, they paid the most money. Look, we're here to level the playing field with no regulations for anyone, and let the market decide. Let the people decide what they want to get in and what they want to ride in, and what the driver looks like, or what clothes he's got on, and what kind of vehicle he's got, or how secure they feel. It's up to the free market to determine, and they'll flush out the malfeasant investments relatively quickly.
Joe, what about that idea? What about relaxing some of these requirements on taxi cabs companies? Is there any room for that?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I think that's but I think we need to realize why there's a lot of pushback to some degree, and especially from a lot of the drivers with the settlement and stuff, is that when you flood the streets with a whole bunch of drivers, I mean, you guys understand supply and demand. I mean, if you're a driver, all of a sudden your wages go way down and it's not worth driving anymore. And then people who try and do it for a few months realize the wear and tear on their vehicle is just destroying their vehicle, and they're not getting compensated for that, let alone making any kind of profit on top of that. And so, yeah, if there are some people, whether they're TNC drivers or taxi cab drivers, who are trying to make a living, I think we need to think about whether we actually want professional drivers out there who are available, or if it's all just people who are part-time and have extra time here and there to really supplement our entire transportation system.
I took an Uber here today, and I was talking to my driver, and she said that she worked as a full-time security guard, and that she was injured and she couldn't work anymore, and so she became an Uber driver. She works full-time for them, and totally unprompted, she said, you know what, I make a lot more money driving for Uber than I did in my last job. So
How long has she been doing that?
How
long?
I don't know how long.
Yeah, I've never had the same Uber or Lyft driver twice, ever, and I've never had anybody who's been driving for more than a few months. And I think that tells you a whole lot about why they don't want fingerprinting, because they churn through drivers so quickly that they can't do it if you actually force them to go through just a couple of extra little steps. And that's what hurts the people who really do it for a living. So, I mean, I think we have to consider that while we open this up, but I do think we should open it up and level the playing field, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I think we're running out of time, so I want to move to audience Q&A. So if we have a roving mic, why don't we, if you would, let's start in the back and we'll work our way up. So one gentleman behind you. Yeah. And then you're next, ma'am.
Thank y'all very much for being here. Joe, you mentioned Sober Monkey. I'm thrilled you brought it up. It is a good product that's used. What's interesting is there's no regulation on them. There's no insurance required of the drivers. There's no background check of the drivers who are getting in to drive my car while I'm drunk. No regulation. You have any thoughts on that?
I don't know that. I don't know what other, because I know that we actually have real ride sharing here, which is Karma. I mean, by the way, ride sharing is anytime you're in the car with more than one person going towards the same direction. It is not using an app. I mean, Uber is a taxi cab that you hail like this as opposed to like this. That's mainly the difference there. But, again, I think we should open it up for everybody and make it a level playing field. And so if people want to make extra money by taking drunk people home, then I think they should go through the same process as everybody else. But I definitely think we should make it easier to be hired to do that process.
So you think they should be regulated, is what you're saying? I think his question
Yeah,
is, should
absolutely.
they be regulated?
I mean, I think if there's money being exchanged, then yes. If it's not and it's just your buddy, oh, hey, buddy, come get me. Sure, monkey, I'll be there. Like, whatever, then that's fine. No regulations. But if you're exchanging money because our roads are expensive and we have to maintain them, and we'll probably have a public transit bond thing maybe later this year. This stuff costs a lot of money. And so we need to make sure that there's some regulation in some way, yes, for the city to take money from these companies in some way to pay for our infrastructure.
So can I ask a question?
That's it.
Please.
So does that apply? What about pizza delivery? What about floral delivery? What about Domino's when I call them to deliver a pizza to me? Should we be taking a cut of them because they're using our roads?
I think we are taking a cut of those companies. I mean, I'm sure Domino's pays local taxes and they own those buildings, or they're paying rent, or they're paying property taxes or something. But, you know, if Uber claims they have 10,000 employees, but they're only, you know, they're not actually paying any money to the city to operate, I think that's a huge problem. Especially if they have 10,000 cars on our streets, that's a huge problem.
They're paying vehicle taxes, they're paying gas taxes.
No, the
the
drivers are.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
The point is the government is getting a cut.
No, I think that's a huge problem that Uber puts all of the burden on the driver or the rider. And I think that's a huge problem because they run all their taxes through the Bermuda and through these shell corporations to avoid paying U.S. taxes, and then they want to avoid paying local taxes. So I think that's a huge problem. Absolutely, they should be paying something.
It's already a requirement that every person that carries a Texas driver's license has fingerprints. So why would they need to have it twice?
Because you have 8 other fingers. This is the ones you give at the to get your driver's license. Well, because if I poked him like that, that wouldn't really do a whole lot for this right here. I mean, that's the answer to your question. I mean, you have 10 fingers. I mean, unless you only have thumbs, then that would probably be the answer.
My thumb's different than everybody else's thumb.
Exactly. That's why we need it.
No, that's why when they have a thumbprint on their driver's license, you have it in the records. And all this other stuff is just false flag. When I'm fingerprinted by the state of Texas and get my driver's license, the state of Texas has captured my fingerprint. To create this alter person that you fabricated for this argument would be very difficult. You'd have to falsify all kinds of things. And if you went to all that trouble, well, why wouldn't you go rob a bank instead? Why would you go to all the trouble to falsify all this stuff? It's just silly.
Well,
It's just a silly argument.
There have been instances of people falsifying their identities to drive for a Lyft and
Instances
Uber.
of people
But
living, you know, in a bank safe underwater to escape, but it doesn't mean everybody can do it.
all right, I'm not sure I
Make
understand
sense?
where you're. No, I don't think so.
there's a
But that's okay.
Right here.
There's another one over there.
When you're talking about next legislative session, possible laws or not, whether fingerprinting for everybody or no fingerprinting for everybody, how do we square that with the Texas idea of local control? And I'd like to hear from all of you of what trumps what in your mind when you come to personal control or local control or a unifying or a equal playing field?
I think I'll take a stab on that one first. I think that's a good question. I do want to step back just to that previous question, is would it pass the Senate to do fingerprinting? I'll just remind everybody that last session we passed a bill to get rid of the fingerprints from DPS. It made me think of that. So we required DPS to destroy the fingerprints that they'd already illegally collected. So for us to reverse directions on that would be pretty unprecedented and very odd, so I don't think that's going to happen at all. To answer your question, where does local control stop and end and related to the state? I like to look at local control as not a blank check. Our goal, local governments were created by the legislature. All the authority they have comes from the state legislature. And so does the federal government. It's created by the state legislature. So we have a role and a responsibility to oversee the political subdivisions in this state to make sure they're not trampling down the liberties of economic liberty and personal liberties of the people they're governing. And there's nothing more important than economic liberty, really. And this is a big issue. So where do they all end and stop? I'm not sure. You can put your finger on it and say. But when they start... this issue is one I think we'll put our foot down on, and we're going to make a call on, because we don't want a patchwork, a quilt work of rules and regulations around the state of Texas. about how to operate in our state. And it's, like I said earlier, minimum wage will probably be one. Gun laws could be one. But we need to send a message that we're going to preempt these liberal political subdivisions that keep putting forward failed policies, failed liberal ideas and policies from the past, and promoting those because they run nonpartisan elections. And so I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm for local control, but again, it's not a blank check.
Ellen, you want to take a stab?
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. The Constitution gives the powers to the state, and the liberties that the local government has come from the state. So although, of course, there are certain things that are best handled probably at the local level, only to a certain extent where you're not infringing on people's economic or personal freedom. That's ultimately the role of the state to protect.
Josiah, what's our Street's Institute's view on that particular issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, government is supposed to work for the people, right? Not people conform themselves to the government. So you have to ask, in looking at, what is the proper level to deal with whatever the problem is, what's the level that's going to give you the best solution? And if you have a city, where a lot of people who will be affected by this Austin ordinance are not actually able to vote on the ordinance because they live outside the city limits. They might work inside the city or they travel inside the city. And so, they don't have a say as far as that goes. You also have a situation where you can have people who travel, a single ride can travel through several different localities or municipalities. You have a patchwork of different regulations. So, those are all things that, maybe a larger scale solution to the problem makes sense.
Joe?
Well, it's obviously a matter of convenience on whether you like the people who you voted for and regulate you locally or not. I can tell you in Austin, we certainly would like more local control and get the folks off our backs, from the state. I mean, look at it. We have a 2.5% unemployment rate in Austin, so it's not like these liberals are killing everybody's jobs over here. We're fueling the Texas economy right here in Austin. We're doing it in Houston. We're doing it in Dallas with a bunch of Democrats on city council. No idea how what universe that came from, but that's what we're doing. And so, yeah, I like local control here in Austin. I love the fact that we can do different things and be innovative. And I think we just have to strike a balance because I think, it just depends on what issue it is. And if you like the issue or you don't like the issue, you're going to say, well, I think the Republicans at the state should be handling this, or I think the liberals in City Hall should be handling this. So I don't really think it's a blanket statement. I think it just depends on where you fall on the spectrum and where you live.
Can I say one other thing?
Please.
So, I like to say the ultimate form of local control is individual choice, letting people decide for themselves whether they want to use this service or not use the service or whatever. So, I look at local control issues from that perspective often.
Where are we? Here we are.
This question is to you, Joe, and the panel as well. In order to understand execution of policy, you have to understand philosophical framework. You made a statement, Joe, in regards to do we want ride sharing in Austin as our transportation overload system, and I'm paraphrasing you a bit. We seems to refer to the government, and that is power in the hands of a few. Why not allow the millennials in all ages to have the liberty to decide if they want to infiltrate this system of transportation with ride sharing? So you're taking away freedom from the masses in order to give power to a few. That seems to be your philosophical framework. Can you speak on that as well as the rest of the panel?
Well, yes, I disagree. And first of all, we the people is how we talk about our government in the United States. And so I don't think that ride sharing is going to leave Austin, even if Uber and Lyft leave Austin, because again, we just define, you can look at the City of Austin website, or you can just look at some other third party and figure out what ride sharing actually means. Look at the AP, who set the standards for how we talk about issues and definitions of words which matter. And ride sharing does not mean anything to do with hailing a ride through an app. It's carpooling. Is that not a liberal idea or what? It's sharing, it's reducing our environmental impact, it's reducing our carbon footprint. That's what ride sharing is, and that's going nowhere.
So we have one more down here.
I guess one thing that worries me is kind of back to the pizza delivery. It's like, where does this end? If we start regulating these rides, I'm more worried about the service people who come into my home when I live alone, when I need something repaired. And, you know, I would hope those companies, I try to deal with companies I know who are local, who vet their own employees and do that. But I just would worry, I mean, where would this end if this starts off? I know this is a little off topic. I'd rather see more done about texting and driving than I would about who's giving the rides personally, but it just seems like a lot of energy that might just start a momentum into, if we're talking about safety and security, you know, I would think it's harder to do something in a car than when you live alone and someone's in your home and there's no one there with you. I guess it's just a snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and bigger if we start saying, well, it's for safety.
Right. I mean, I completely agree with you. And again, you know, there's a lot of people through this election who have said, well, I don't use ride sharing, so why should I care? And I think that that's exactly one of the reasons why they should care, because their business might be next. I heard recently that there is a new company that's looking at it's basically a kind of ride sharing, but for chefs. So if you need someone to make dinner that night, you can get on and get someone to come to your house and cook your family dinner because y'all aren't going to be home. Well, the city, you know, they're worried that the city's going to come after them to get a piece of their profits and to regulate their employees. And so, and where does it stop? I don't know. I think that it sets a really bad precedent. And I think that that's why it's so important that we retain. There has been so much talk about, the corporation coming in and writing their own rules, and of course that's not what happened. It's the citizens petition, which is, you know, the truly the people, you know, trying to tell their government, trying to tell the people who are supposed to be representing them at the city level what they want to see. And I think that was really obviously an effective use here because it led to this election, but I don't know where it stops.
I mean, I bet I can get 65,000 signatures for people who want to keep craft beer in Austin or want breakfast tacos on every corner. I bet I can get 65,000 signatures in Austin. But the idea of what we're talking about of regulating is the livery system, not delivery like pizza, but the livery system, which is human beings. And so that is where this is stopped. But with the thumbs up voluntary program, that could be extended to anything, but voluntarily, not institutionally. So it would be, well, hey, I only want to order a Domino's because Domino's uses fingerprinting drivers or whatever, if that's what you wanted. Or I only want this guy cutting my grass because I know he's been vetted by this third party, blah, blah, blah. So no, I think it should be a choice. I think we should have choices, going back to what you were saying. But at the end of the day, yes, the government does have some minuscule, at least, responsibility to ensure public safety, to at least assure that there's some accountability for public safety, because there is no 100% guarantee for public safety.
Well, and I guess that his argument made me think of, it goes back to the question of what problem are we trying to solve, right? Is there a problem with pizza delivery, you know, that we're trying to solve with fingerprinting? I don't know. I mean, we have these services that are working really well for Austin. I just think it's such a shame that the city is wasting so much time and energy with all the other problems that we have here in the city, that we're just wasting so much time and energy doing this. And to the point of, you know, Austin having low unemployment and other cities that tend to be more liberal than the state, and why they're able to be so successful. I think one thing that's often left out of that conversation is the fact that the reason we're able to be so successful is because we live in a state with low taxes, with a predictable regulatory environment that encourages job growth and all of these other things. So that certainly is an important part of why people live in Texas and why people choose to live in Houston, Dallas, or Austin.
We're successful in spite of the cities trying to keep us from being successful.
We have a question right here.
Yeah, it's one of these questions, really a statement. But the gentleman on the far end keeps saying, well, we just want to make this, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Keep saying we're going to make this voluntary, but I don't think that's really a clear way to say it, because if you make a regulation that requires this, and it's voluntary if you want to exist as a driver like that. So it's not voluntary, it's mandatory what you're talking about, and you keep using the word voluntary. I think what we have without the regulation doing it, then it's voluntary. The driver can decide whether to drive for that company or not. The individual can decide whether to use that service or not. That's voluntary. When you make a regulation or law, that's no longer voluntary, that's mandatory. So that's not the right word to use. Sorry, that's more of a statement than a question. But.
Joe, you respond? Got anything?
Well, then maybe we should tell Uber and Lyft to stop saying that the city is forcing them out, since it's obviously going to be their choice to leave or not. I mean, I guess that's semantics, but.
Yeah, I just had one quick question, kind of at the end here. How much did this election, how many items were on this election?
One.
One. What was this single item ballot cost the
About
taxpayers
800.
of the city of Austin?
About $800,000 for this election.
$800,000. So is it possible that there would have been a better way to handle this within the city government than spending $800,000 to decide an issue that was already found very was very negatively handled by 65,000 Austin residents to start with?
I'd say we institute loser pays. Anybody like that concept? I think we're on that path. I think we're on that path, actually. And I think if this ends, then we will be back on that path. And I hate that we had to have this election blow everything up and change, and change that process that we were going through. Government does take a long time, unfortunately, but it's because we have so many different people's interests at stake.
Isn't this really, though, I just want to say, isn't this really about the cab companies versus the ride-sharing companies?
No.
I mean, I think that's really what it's about. So,
Well, then you have to think that the taxis paid off the police association, the fire, the EMS, the legal women voters.
I don't know anything
Democratic
about
Party.
all that. I'm just saying right now, that's what it appears to me on this issue. And what we want to do is just get the government out of the way completely for both industries. There's reasons to take cabs. I like cabs under certain circumstances, and I like ride sharing under certain circumstances. Let's put them on a level playing field. And the fact that the city really wants to get so micromanaging in this industry, I just find really surprising, and I find it against common sense. If you don't want to get in if you feel like there's a problem, don't get in the car. I mean, it's pretty simple.
No, I want to answer his question really quickly. I mean, I think that there were several ways for the city to avoid. I think it was closer to 500,000 that it cost the city to pay for this election. The first thing would have been to actually try to come up with. Well, actually, there wasn't anything wrong with the existing regulations, right, that had been going fine for 2 years. So number one would have been just leave it alone. Number two would have been, after the citizens petition did happen, it gave the city two choices legally. Either the city council could have adopted the language that was in the citizens petition, and if they didn't adopt it, they had to call an election. So we had a vote at City Council whether or not to adopt the citizens petition, and the City Council chose not to. And by state law, we were then forced to put it on the ballot. So that was, of course, the choice that I would have preferred. We heard overwhelmingly from the constituents, 65,000 people is more people than have ever voted for any mayor in the history of Austin. It is an overwhelming amount of people, and the council chose not to listen and to call the election.
So this election was caused by the city council,
Yes.
No question.
and that's the price tag.
Yes.
Okay.
Looks like we have one more here in the back.
Sure. Joe seemed to agree that there should be a little bit of regulation, a little bit of government involved in this. So I appreciate that limited government perspective. I wanted to ask the councilwoman, what would a limited amount of regulation look like, a reasonable amount of local regulation on transportation?
Well, I guess I would say, I don't know from what angle you're asking about. If you're asking whether I think the taxi companies could use to have some of the regulations lifted off them, absolutely. I do think that the framework that the 2014 council put in place was working fine. I don't know. There wasn't an outcry, as Councilmember Zimmerman has said many times before. A lot of the issues that we deal with at City Council are because there's an issue that's brought to our attention, and because people are really upset about property taxes, because people are upset about the utility bills. I mean, whatever the issue is, then that causes the city council to take action and do something about it. In this case, everything was going great. Taxi companies seemed to be fine. The ride-sharing companies and customers seemed to be great. So there wasn't really an event or an outcry that caused the council to kind of go back and make these significant changes to TNCs. So what do I have the answer for what a level playing field looks like. I mean, it's an incredibly complicated question. I think it depends on where you fall in that question of kind of getting rid of taxis or or trying to come up with something where they can both exist harmoniously, which is what I think that we had before December. So does that answer your question?
Well, the senator was mentioning lifting all regulations
Right.
on that, and so whether or not that's reasonable, if it's not reasonable to lift all of them, what would that little bit of local government, local regulation look like to you as a conservative who does want to make sure public safety is ensured, but also make sure that we're operating in as close to a free market as humanly possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what the senator said. People wouldn't choose, individual companies have a vested interest in making sure that the services that they provide are safe and good. To the restaurant example that he used earlier, guess what? That taco stand that that had cockroaches everywhere and had, you know, people who were cooking food, there was hair in the food, they wouldn't last very long because there would only be 3 people who went there before they realized that they weren't going to eat tacos there anymore. So it's in the company's best interest to make sure that they're providing the safest and the best services possible. And the companies who are going to be the most profitable are going to be the ones who do those things on their own, not because the government is telling them to.
I would say about regulations that one thing I learned in my very short time here in the state capitol is that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get rid of government. And once you've got it, it is going to stick around forever. And so if we say we're going to go forward with some regulations in this business, in this industry, and we're going to regulate this and all this and that, let me tell you, they always get more, they always grow, and they never go away. And so if you just think about what you'd be asking for, because what you're asking for is something that's going to continue to get stickier and stickier. And you're going to say, well, this is good, this regulation's good. Yeah, that's good. What about this one? What about this one? And every session, they're going to keep adding on to that, and you'll be right back to square one.
Adam, I think we have time for one last question. Do you got a question?
He doesn't need a mic.
Yeah, I was just going to comment and say that regarding Uber and Lyft drivers who've been working for more than a few months, and I don't remember the other criteria you used, but I have definitely had Uber drivers at this point who have been driving with the company for multiple years, and they were not. They are none too pleased with the efforts the city council has made, and I've definitely had those conversations. So that was just a comment I wanted to make.
All right, with that, folks, please help me thank the panel today. A few last items of housekeeping. Justin, stucco. Also, Equal is Unfair book discussion and signing with co-author Yaron Brook, April 29th at 11:30 a.m. There's also going to be another book signing, Broken but Unbowed, with Governor Greg Abbott, May 18th at 1 o'clock. And then we have another event to keep in mind, Dare to Care, expanding the scope of practice to fill in the gaps in the mental health workforce. That's going to be at the end of May. I hope you guys can join us for all 3 of those events. Thank you once again.